have some mixed feelings on this. Identified as a racial minority myself, with a certain model minority, just worked hard and tended to ignore any discrimination, such that while Asians are still considered a minority in overall college enrollment, they seem to be overrepresented in engineering, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. I think there's considerable resources on campus that deal with these groups, and I get a bit concerned that it might lead to some balkanization, where groups are celebrating their own differences to the extent that they don't even want to assimilate into the larger society. Just continuing from my previous question, there seems to be, there's departments on campus for ethnic studies and women's studies, and I think that should be folded into a serious scholarly study within the sociology department.
All right,
thank you. Currently, 26% of the incoming freshman class are students of color that are from Colorado. Clearly, that's not enough, because around 2% of the student body are African American, about 8.1% of older students are Latino. And I know that we can do a better job. One of the things we have to do is work with K-12, develop better partnerships, because we know the pipeline is not right. You know, a higher percentage of Latinos drop out of high school, and that's an issue for Colorado, just from an economic point of view, because that's the fastest growing demographic in the state. So equity is key, but also just a more pragmatic approach that Colorado's general economy will suffer if we don't make sure that all students have equal access to higher education. So I support the programs and support the students, because I know that from what I've heard from the students, it's often challenging to be the only person of color in class, and everyone looks at you and expects that person to be the spokesperson for their race. And that's very uncomfortable. Yeah, so we need to make sure that we create a welcoming environment. We also need scholarships, because we know that because there are sometimes Indian students that need more scholarships to make sure we get the best and the brightest on the bowl of campus. So but that's true for all of CU. So it's something we have to pay attention to. The pre-collegiate program actually needs more investment, because it's such a successful program for bringing students to this campus.
Thank you. All right, our next question is a little more concrete. We're going to start with Dr. Davidson, and that is, do you support the Colorado Asset Bill, which would allow undocumented students from Colorado high school to pay a tuition rate that is higher than state tuition, but lower than the tuition charged to out-of-state students?
Thank you. I'm not in favor of such a program. I'm not of the belief that we should create a third level of classification aside from in-state and out-of-state tuition. I don't think it's a good idea to try to solve a justice issue by creating other justices. The reality is that we have a number of out-of-state students that are U.S. citizens. We have a number of international students that are here legally on visas, etc., that are paying 3 to 4 times depending on where they are on the campus. Ultimately, this issue is something that the state legislature and the federal government need to decide upon. I don't think it's the job or the responsibility or the purview or jurisdiction or any other descriptor of an individual board of regents, trustees, or governors of a higher education institution to create such programs.
Thank you. And Mr. Ong.
I am not in favor of the asset bill at this point in time, but I am in the long run. And the reason I'm not in favor of it right now is that the combination with the current tuition schedules that were voted on by virtually the entire Board of Regents, it would end up charging most The part-time and summer students would end up paying a higher rate per credit hour here at Seat Boulder than most undocumented full-time fall and spring students. And this is more detail that I alluded to in my opening statement about the discrimination against part-time and summer students. Trying to briefly go over the details. I think you only pay for 11 and a fraction credit hours, and if you take more than that, you basically get free tuition. This spring, the administration proposed increasing that to 12 credit hours, so that's a baby step towards equity for part-time and summer students. But the entire board voted against that, and so they can keep tuition low for only the full-time fall and spring students. I think that our Colorado citizens are our first priority. And once we deal with that problem, then we can deal with other Colorado residents.
Thank you very much. Regent Ludwig.
The Board of Regents supported the asset legislation, and I was one of the persons that voted in favor of supporting it. Here's why. First is moral. I think it's immoral to hold children accountable for the actions of their parents. Second is from a legal point of view. I think it's unjust to have one person account for someone else's activity. And then third is basic economics and self-interest. Colorado needs 67% of its workforce to have a certificate, a 2-year degree, or a 4-year degree by 2018, and currently Colorado's in the mid-50s. So if we want to compete, if we want a good economy, we need as many people as qualified to go to college, to come to college as possible. And I think the asset bill, that tuition rate is a great way to go. Now, before everyone thinks I'm a screaming liberal, the radical state of Texas offers in-state tuition, which is a better deal. The Colorado Springs Gazette, which is certainly not known for its democratic leanings, endorsed the asset legislation. A lot of Republican business leaders have endorsed the asset legislation because it makes fiscal sense for the state. So I'm a strong supporter of asset legislation. If it passes and I'm on the board, I certainly would vote for that in Colorado.
Thank you. And Mr. Belmont.
Yeah, I think Mr. Look nailed it. I think we got to look beyond our documented or undocumented. We have to look beyond all the divisions that we come up with in society to try and one-up each other. And, making undocumented workers pay or discriminating against undocumented workers in an institutional way is not only fiscally logical, it's also moral. And in that sense, in terms of trying to promote an idea of equality for all human beings, regardless of legal status or race or gender or sexual orientation or any of those things, we have to go beyond that and look at all of us, each other as human beings, and see what we can all bring to the table. And I think the asset bill is a step in the right direction. I would even go beyond the asset bill. In some cases, maybe even make it equivalent to in-state tuition. But I believe it's a step in the right direction for that.
Thank you very much. All right, our next question I know you dealt with in a story that I read in the Daily Camera, but we're going to let you address it to this audience as well, which is that State Representative Claire Levy wants universities to be able to set their own weapons policies and may propose legislation to allow them to do so. What is your position on guns being allowed on campus? And I'm going to add to that particularly the concealed carry issue that we're dealing with right now. And this one goes first to Mr. Ong.
I think that recent policies announced by CU Boulder are too restrictive of legal gun carriers. I think that if you declare a gun-free zone, you're only taking away the right of self-defense from law-abiding citizens, and you're giving criminals free rein. I noticed that in recent dormitory remodels that they've put safes in for student use. That seems perfect for storing guns when they are not on the person of the owner. And university policy currently prohibits guns, or they will, as part of their housing contract. And I think that's overly restrictive. I also disagree with the policy that licensed concealed carry should be eliminated from ticketed events. I think the only time that should occur is if there is a very secure perimeter, there are magnetometers for entry, and that you have sufficient armed and uniformed security personnel that can deal with criminals, and such as in courtrooms, in the state capitol building, and the recent Obama rally that was here on campus a month ago.
Thank you very much. Regent Mobley.
I've been unequivocal about not liking guns on campus since I ran in 2006. That position hasn't changed. As a matter of fact, I was so outspoken when the students sued the university. I was fortunate enough to have my name listed first as the person of the board being sued. So I'm against concealed carry on campus. I understand the law perfectly, and I'm not confused by it at all. I think it's a bad idea for students to have guns on campus. I just don't think it's proper for a university setting. So do I support Claire Levy's efforts if she moves forward? Yes, and let me add a caveat. If she also decides that it's the best interest of the state to limit guns from the university campus like we currently do with K-12, I'm perfectly happy with that. But the regents are in the state constitution, having a lot of control over the university. I'm perfectly willing to have that come back to the board. So either way, I do not support guns on campus. I just don't think they're necessary.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea that we do return the rights of gun regulation and gun control to the university to make sure that because we have the best insight into what kind of security measures we're putting on campus and making sure that we're guaranteeing the safety of all the students on campus. Of course, this is all back to we have the idea of individual and collaborative safety in mind. And we all know that in the University of Colorado campuses, there's a chronic issue of alcohol and drug presence, regardless of what kind of rules there are set against those. And adding guns to that mix is just a really bad idea. Also, in terms of that, I also do respect Second Amendment rights. So in that sense, I would rather go from a campus-by-campus initiative. We ask the student bodies as a whole, are you going to have concealed carry on your campuses? And I think each campus the student body should be allowed to say whether they want to have that on their campus or not. Even though I'm pretty sure that most campuses, that all campuses would say, no, we're not in favor of that. In that sense, I think that it's important that we maintain the safety of all students possible, and I think that our security measures promote that and qualify that. I don't think students should be taking the law into their own hands.
Thank you. And finally, Dr. Davis.
Thank you. The CU is not above the law. We must support a safe environment on the campus and also support the law. My favorite part of the university policies talks about how the campus is, quote, not a sanctuary from state and local laws. It's true. I believe CU's revised policy on this issue is both consistent with Colorado law, although it can be much less restrictive, and it's also safe for the university. I support the recent Colorado Supreme Court decision that it is not within the legal capability of individual university boards to circumvent Colorado law, including the concealed carry law from 2003. My goal as a region is to promote a safe and secure environment for CU students, faculty, staff, and visitors on each of the 4 campuses while supporting Colorado's law and the Constitution of the United States. I do not believe that giving each individual institution the ability to make this decision is a good idea, because I think giving such discretion would be nothing but a distraction and induce periodic chaos and arguments among boards, both appointed and elected, and taking away from the energy of why we're really here and the issues very specific to higher education.
Thank you very much. Our next set of questions is going to turn to issues of tuition and budget. The first question will go to you, Regent Ludwig, to start us out. And that is simply, how would you try to keep tuition costs reasonable for students as we move forward?
Well, this is a pretty complicated issue to deal with in 90 seconds, and we'll give it your best shot. So the first thing we have to do is go to the state and ask the voters if they're willing to support higher education, because that's the best measure to begin to address that. Because all the other things I'm about to share with you will not make up for the loss of state support. I cannot emphasize that enough. So things we can do, we can increase online education by 25%, hoping that we get economies of scale. Increase cooperation between college campuses. We compete a lot with CSU, School of Mines, and others. There has to be ways where we can cooperate and share resources. Look, we live in a small state, and we have big ambitions, which is fine, but we don't have all the money to fund them, so we have to find ways to cooperate. Another thing is 3 true semesters. Campus is shut down for the most part of the summer. We give you more opportunities to take classes over the summer, so that's another way. Do we increase technology transfer so we can get more revenues in? Do we look at cuts? Are there some low enrollment programs that we need to go look? If we can be all things to all people, that's what we want to do, but we're in a resource-constrained environment. Are there some low enrollment programs that we need to look at? So those are a number of things one other thing is competency-based classes, meaning you take a course, you match the material, you test, and move on. You don't actually have to sit in the classroom for 3 months if you match the material before that. So those are a number of things we can do, but nothing will replace state support if it goes to zero.
Thank you very much. Mr. Belmont.
There are a number of things we can do from that vary all across the political spectrum, many of which do make sense in terms of implementation so that we can save as much money as possible and gain revenues and then pass those savings on to the students. Especially within the past several years, we've been seeing tuition costs go up 5-10% every single year. And if this rate is kept up, it's going to just completely drive the University of Colorado into a high tuition model that's not going to be affordable for the Colorado public. And then that's going to spell disaster for the state economy. So we have to look at a number of different ways. I'm very partial to the idea of increasing public-private partnerships. And I think that this is not only going to be beneficial in terms of maybe passing a little bit of the bill on to private sector enterprises who would like to take up a little bit of the bill in return for some support from the students, but I think it would also provide some real-world opportunities for CE students. For example, a private business comes on board with a project that they would like to have some CE students for, and the students can participate in that project and get some real-world experience, which adds value to their education. And then the private institution can also pay for a little bit of that, so therefore lowering the costs. In addition to that, I think it's important that we look into the voters in terms of whether they want to increase state funding, and all of that along with other issues are doing.
Thank you. Dr. Davidson?
There are really two ways you can balance this type of budget. Number one is to increase your revenues. The second is to decrease your costs. And the best way is to do a little bit of both, or a lot of both. Revenue ideas, Tyler pointed out, some public-private partnerships, more specifically technology transfer, taking the innovations that we create on this campus, on the Anschutz campus, the Denver campus, and Colorado Springs, into the private marketplace, and then using those margins and those profits to fund the institution backwards. Secondly, is we need to increase unrestricted fundraising. We do a very good job of fundraising at the University of Colorado system, but unfortunately, 97 to 98% or so is restricted to a specific project, et cetera, and does not necessarily apply to operational costs and to defer the cost of education of the average undergraduate student or graduate student. And I have a number of ideas of ways to do that, which is a whole long 90-second topic. As far as cost containment goes, we need to bring in appropriate areas, technology in the classroom, and then pass on those cost savings to the students rather than taking that extra margin, which we do now, of offering those programs and then simply dispersing it through the rest of the institution. Education, the model by which we deliver education is rapidly changing, and it's been changing for a long time. We need to adapt. It's becoming less expensive to be an educated person. It's becoming more expensive to get a degree.
Thank you.
All of my opponents have some very good ideas. A lot of it is trying to take credit for initiatives, programs that are already underway. Just continuing Brian's statement about changes in education. I attended a mostly faculty meeting in my own department, electrical engineering, a few weeks ago, and they are very aware of these changes. But I think CU in general is probably lagging behind most universities, so that needs to be considered. I guess I'll offer a few specifics, though. Here at CU Boulder, we have a student athletic fee. This was passed by the regents about 3 decades ago in response to a financial crisis in the athletic department and establishment candidates being what they are. That fee has never been repealed. With the switch to the Pac-10, after startup expenses, the athletic department is going to get an additional $10 million in revenue from TV contracts, so that fee will definitely be obsolete. It needs to be repealed. And that'll only reduce costs 1% or so, but it's a good start. I also favor legalizing marijuana, and that will increase sales tax revenue for the state, and it will also lower prison costs, but I'm leaning against Amendment 64. It puts too much detail in the Constitution.
I'm going to ask kind of a follow-up question. It's another question that came up from, and most of these questions were generated from students. This one is kind of a follow-up, so for those of you who felt frustrated by the 90 seconds, you get a second pass at it. We're going to be starting with Mr. Belmont, and that is, and there's no slide on this one, so you're going to have to listen. What other sources of revenue would you propose for the university other than tuition or state funding? What kinds of, some of you have mentioned technology transfers, things like that. What other possibilities are there for revenue sources for the university? We'll start with you, Mr. Belmont.
Well, I think the public-private partnerships, they have the most potential because that's going to be the largest field, and it's going to be applicable to a variety of fields across a variety of majors. So I think that's going to be priority number one. Kind of going off to Amendment 64, I think it's quite sad that because we pay no taxes in this state that we have to resort to ideas as drastic as legalization of marijuana to help pay for funding. Until this state is willing to actually pay more in taxes, I feel like Amendment 64 is a necessary evil, and we have to do that in order to preserve the educational quality of our institutions. In addition to that, we also need to point out the fact that state higher institutions of higher education are combating with each other over what public money does exist, which is creating a lot of one-upping procedures, such as putting in state-of-the-art dormitories or putting in extremely nice athletic facilities. These are problems. These are little frivolities that don't add anything to the value of your degree ultimately, but they do jack up your student loan debt. So I think it's important that the universities come together and look at, hey, what kind of mutual initiatives do we have together, and how can we complement each other's interests rather than trying to one-up each other. And I think there are a lot of statements that can be made there that can also be passed on to the students.
Thank you. Dr. Davidson.
First, I'd like to say we tend to talk a lot about other ways to generate money besides public dollars because the University of Colorado Board of Regents does not have control over obtaining more public dollars. I tend to believe that public funding of higher education is a good investment. I'm not an individual thinks it's a bad investment as long as it's used for the mission, specifically in the areas of teaching and professional training, which are the first missionary of the university. Aside from that, I think our public contributions, again, we talked about if we are able to collect those in a more unrestricted manner, we can apply them to the operational funding. We can talk some about that. But please keep in mind that when I ran for Regents in 2006, when I became a candidate, the budget for the University of Colorado system was $1.9 billion. This year it's going to be $2.9 billion. Even in a time when state unrestricted funding that's typically associated with undergraduate education has declined by a nominal amount of about $150 to $160 million. So the university is doing very well at generating revenue in general, especially in the healthcare sector, which I'm from. But a lot of those dollars are not available to be used to subsidize the general operation of undergraduate education.
Thank you. And Mr. Ong.
This is a difficult question. There are a number of ideas proposed that are already underway. Public-private partnerships and technology transfer. I think that would be an increasing source of revenue as we get more skilled at it. As far as the housing facilities that are being improved, they are accounted for separately. They are paid for strictly by the room and board rates. They are not paid for through tuition. And the housing department is doing that in response to student demand for those facilities, but they are not. If you live off campus, you don't pay for those. I am in favor of taxpayers' bill of rights, and I think K-12 is getting sufficient for their taxes are probably high enough. But I do favor the legalization of marijuana. The current proposal, Amendment 64, would limit that to 21 and older. The sales tax revenue is currently captured, since it's a black market, other than this small amount for medical marijuana. But that would also lower prison costs, that would free up some revenue, and in that should be increased revenue to restore some funding for higher education from the state.
Thank you very much. Regent Lovely.
One of the things that we can do that we haven't talked about already is creating classes that generate profit and use them for continuing education for adults. We have a very robust continuing education program at Boulder. EDU, I think, does a better job of taking individuals that are later in life that have no disposable income on academic adventures, basically. Going to London to see Shakespeare, charging a lot of money for that, cruises, that sort of thing. So bringing in some money from that as well. Getting businesses to fund buildings, selling naming rights to buildings, as unpleasant as that might be the only way to get the buildings because we're out of state funding. Research, we do have to mind the research. It doesn't all pay for itself, so sometimes when we get a lot of research dollars, that's not always net positive. But one of the things we don't do well, as Chancellor Stefano talked about yesterday in the State of the Campus Address, is we don't do well with industry research. We do really great with federal research. So that's an area I know the universities are looking at. Also, philanthropic groups. What are some of these big private foundations that we can partner with for specific programs for some general funding, as well as what's been mentioned before, increased private giving. Those are all a number of ways that we can look at to bring in more revenue. One of the things we haven't talked about is fees. Fees have gone up considerably. And so one of the things that the board looks at and talks about a lot are fees. So we need to be mindful of those as well.
Thank you very much. All right, this next question goes to you first, Dr. Davidson, and that is, in the face of tightening budgets and the possibility of additional cuts at the state level, what programs do you consider to be a priority for the university, and which ones would you consider cutting if that became necessary?
I'm not coming to the board, or hopefully won't be coming to the board with any preconceived notions of specific programs to cut. I can tell you the system by which I would think about these such things. And number one is we need to support the programs that the general marketplace tells us that we need. And we need science, technology, mathematics, engineering. But we also need people that understand where we've been, where we've come from, where we're going, in the humanities, because a lot of times those individuals can go into a number of positive areas and be very successful. One of the things that I think the university could do, not only at CU but across Colorado and the United States, is to start keeping data on how well students and graduates from different programs do on a number of metrics. Ability to get a job, satisfaction, income, ability to pay back school loans, etc., and then make that data available. Now, just in the last year or two, universities embarked on such a mission, but I think in a consumer-based time period, especially when we're spending and students and families are borrowing a significant amount of money, we need to have that data available. We have a lot of smart people here that can work spreadsheets and statistical analysis, and we should have that so we can begin to think about these things on more of a return on investment type of idea.
Thank you. Mr. Ong.
Good answer, Brian. I would definitely consider the physics department to be a priority, given the number of Nobel Prize winners that have come out of it. A lot of that is research at the graduate level, but I still think that's probably our crown jewel. I don't know that I would cut anything. Or again, I wouldn't have any preconceived notions, but I do think there's some opportunity for consolidation. I remember former CU President Elizabeth Hoffman was faced with some difficulties, and she thought that cut should be narrow and deep rather than broad. She didn't want to, nip away at everything, but she wanted to try to isolate things that were the lowest priority so that there would be sufficient resources for those departments that were already centers of excellence. I guess it would depend upon what metrics that you had for evaluating the various departments in the market. Demand for it. For instance, environmental studies is very popular right now.
Thank you very much.
I think this question sort of addresses reality that we can't be all things to all people. And it's part of the challenge of the institution. We tend to grow and grow and grow, and we don't have to sit back and say, is this really a strategic focus for us? So one of the things we have to do is work with the faculty and administration to say, where does the University of Colorado want to be world class? Where do we want to be regionally great and have the potential for being world class? And then where do we need to be very, very good so everyone gets a great education, and then invest along those priority lines? But it's a communal process. On Flagship 2030, the Boulder campus is operating on. There's this huge amounts of input from faculty, from administrators, from the community that went to the whole state. What is the state asking? What does the business community need? What are our visions for ourselves? But we do have to get honest, and so some low enrollment programs might be gone, some might not, just depending. And the other thing is low enrollment programs could we team up with other universities that have the same majors that have low enrollment programs to keep them alive, because fiscally it would be more possible that way. So it's that broad approach of being very strategic in where we want to invest our money, and then make those decisions.
Mr. Belmont.
I think it's important that we invest in that the University of Colorado, regardless of its fiscal standings, that we invest in majors that are going to be in demand in the state of Colorado as well as across the United States. It's also important that, as my opponents have said, that we maintain the funding for programs that have gained this CU the incredible reputation that it has. We definitely need to keep those programs alive and healthy. When it comes to making cuts, I think it's, in that sense, we have to go to the students. We have to go to the students and ask them, what kind of services, what kind of programs are you willing to see go away in the name of keeping your university alive? And because that's ultimately the group of people who we're serving are the students, the people coming here paying to get an education. So in that sense, we have to make sure that we're keeping their interests in mind, that we're not cutting programs that they consider very vital or very important.
Thank you very much. All right, we've got one last question for you, and then we'll go to closing comments, but this question may overlap with some of your closing comments. The question, and it will go first to you, Mr. Ong, is what would be your top priorities as a regent?
The general priorities are probably keeping tuition as low as possible for all students and maintaining and improving the excellence of the programs that we do have. But again, the one specific issue that I'm addressing that I have lobbied the regents for since 2004 is the discrimination against part-time students and summer students and tuition and fees. Because this one really gnaws at me. I wasn't really, I looked at the tuition schedule when I was a full-time student here, but I didn't think much of it. After I tried to return a few years later, I was thinking of working and taking classes part-time, and then I looked at the schedule and I saw the price discrimination, and it's just ridiculous to have to pay almost twice as much per credit hour for the same credits, because it takes the same number of credits to graduate. And once we deal with this issue, then we can deal with tuition for undocumented immigrants who are deserving of a reasonable tuition rate also.
Thank you. Regent Ludwig?
So I think anyone that runs for regents is going to say they're for affordable tuition. So that's a given. We're all going to make that a priority. So that's the good news. My other priorities would be going to the voters. I mentioned how critical that is. Everything else is secondary to that, quite frankly. If we have no state support, we privatize higher education in Colorado, and that's not acceptable. Cooperation between colleges, as I mentioned, it's key. Any reasonable person who said develop a 21st century higher education system in Colorado would not pick the model we've got. So we have to figure out how to cooperate better. As I mentioned, 3 true semesters, 25% increase in online classes at least in the next 6 years, competency-based courses, and as I mentioned, greater cooperation K through 12, so we can get more Colorado students into Colorado colleges and end the Colorado paradox. The Colorado paradox is that Colorado has one of the most highly educated workforces in the country, but we import most of them. Our students graduating from high school coming to college are one of the lowest in the nation. So that means a lot of work too, and I think greater cooperation between universities and K through 12. So those things will keep anyone really, really busy for about 2 decades.
Thank you. Mr. Belmont?
Before we address, top priority is going to be how do we keep tuitions from growing beyond the ceiling? How do we, without having to make massive cuts and huge academic excellence? That said, I think we need to stop beating around the bush when it comes to how can we really address the meat of the issue of why Colorado is receiving state funding. And so I think in that sense, we need to look at, yes, the economic downturn that we witnessed lately has been crushing to state revenues. But another issue is the issue of Tabor. And traditionally, CU regents don't have any leverage when it comes to trying to address long-term fiscal plans for the entire state as a whole. But the CU regents need to go beyond their traditional roles and really attack that core problem. Because that's the reason why in 1997 the state had to give back several billions of dollars of excesses in tax revenues. And now we don't have anything to go back on when we're in economic hardship. In addition to that, I really want to look into the public-private partnerships. I think that's a really great opportunity for us to not only keep costs low for students, but also increase the depth of their education, increase the comprehensiveness of their education. So all that said, there are many different ways that we can bring new ideas to the table to keep costs down. And I hope to be pragmatic in looking at all those situations and seeing what we can do as a whole to make sure that they come into reality.
Thank you. And Dr. Davis?
Thank you. We've talked a lot about affordability, which is number one on my list, but I won't bore you with any more affordability talk. Number two on my list is healthcare. And I think a lot of people in Colorado, and even within the CU system, don't realize that just over 40% of the University of Colorado system budget of $2.9 billion comes from healthcare services, research, and education. If you take into the account the University of Colorado health system, which is now a 4-hospital system, and add in even just the School of Medicine, where I'm from, of about 600 million or so, the University of Colorado healthcare system completely eclipses the entire CU system budget if you take healthcare out. It's going to be about $2.5, $2.6 billion. When we talk about areas of the university that are successful in making large margins, that's one area. The University of Colorado Health System will likely become the largest healthcare provider, hospital-based provider in the state of Colorado within 2013, and I'm very excited about that. The other issue, when we talk about public-private partnerships, there are huge opportunities with the Bioscience Park just north of Anschutz Medical Campus, where private industry can partner with the university and then take those innovations, medications, therapies, etc., to the private market. I always think of the University of Wisconsin. I visited there about a year and a half ago when we were looking for an electronic medical record system for University Hospital. And I heard about the hundreds of millions of dollars the University of Wisconsin has made off of warfarin or Coumadin, one of the most common anticoagulants. What CU needs, we need a Coumadin or some type of innovation like that.
Thank you, Dr. Davidson. All right, so we're going to go to closing statements. We're going to take these in reverse order from the opening statements. So we'll start with you, Mr. Belmont, and we'll work our way across the stage. Because you have been very respectful of the time limits on the answering questions. You have a little bit of latitude here, so we're going to give you up to 2 minutes for closing comments. Say whatever you like.
Well, I want to first off thank everybody here for coming out tonight. I think it's great that you were able to sit through what I hope is excruciating and boring. And because you actually do care about where your university is going, and for that, my hat is off to you people. So, about the CU Regent election that's coming up in November, I think it's fair to say that we agree on the most important issues, and that is preserving the University of Colorado's academic excellence and making sure that we're keeping the cost affordable for students. The University of Colorado has, in this sense, become a beacon of success in terms of keeping that preservation and keeping students at the top of its list of priorities. I want to stress the importance that voters coming up look at all the candidates, regardless of which parties they're coming from or what parties they're registered to. And that you vote because you care about what the University of Colorado is going to look like in 6 years. And not because you're just registered under one kind of method of thought. I think voting third party especially is about one of the most symbolic statements you can make. Some people like to say it's throwing your vote away. I disagree. I think it's a statement that you refuse to confine your views to the limitations of the absolute sets of values presented to you by the Republicans and the Democrats. And I think that the institutionalization and the polarization of these two parties has destroyed our country's ability to function with everybody's interests and everybody's values in mind. I know the party banner under which I'm running, the American Constitution Party, is not really at the top of your list when you think of pragmatic organizations, but I can assure you that if I'm elected to this office, that I will embrace a comprehensive plan that works to ensure the common good and look at the common interests that we all share as individuals who are dedicated to the preservation of the University of Colorado. And I think as a young person, I want to point out that you don't stop learning in life. And so the fact that you would adhere yourself to a certain mode of thought throughout your entire life is a little bit foolhardy. And I think that moral pragmatism is something that we can all use.
Thank you very much. Regent Ludwig.
Thank you. You know, the four of us before you have put a lot of time into running for office. And I think everyone here has a good heart and is here for the right reasons. They want to do what's right for Colorado, what's right for the university. And we just have different approaches. And I think tonight you got to hear, where are we similar, where are we different, right? And it's pretty clear. I'm proud to say I'm the only candidate that's been endorsed by Governor Hickenlooper. That means something to you. He and I share a philosophy of pragmatism and reaching across the aisle to get something done. As someone put himself in college, I spent the last 6 years working to keep tuition affordable, extending access to higher education, and working to increase efficiencies and keep costs down. I'll continue to work on that for the next 6 years. But as I've mentioned before, the state constitution is tied in knots. We're going to privatize higher education. We have to spend a lot of time working on that. Everything else is secondary to that major issue. And I'm sorry if I'm beating that horse over and over, but we've got to hear that, and the public is going to have to respond. During this campaign, I traveled to all 64 counties in 10 days, over 3,200 miles. Why did I do that? To demonstrate my passion for serving you, serving the university, and talking about the importance of higher education throughout Colorado, because it matters. No matter where someone lives, whether they went to see you, went to college or not. But why I'm so passionate about higher education, why I know it's so important, is because it changed my life forever. I never thought I was actually going to graduate from college. And so when I walked across the stage and they called my name, it was the happiest moment of my life. And I want to make that as available to as many people as possible, because that was only possible. Vote and support, we can do a lot in the next 6 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. On.
I have some miscellaneous comments, I guess, as follow. Another department here on the Boulder campus is biochemistry, and it has another Nobel Prize winner, Tom Cech. And on the East Campus, got a nice brand new building with a great research space, and I expect a lot will come out of that in conjunction with the Anschutz Medical Campus and their work in healthcare. When I first ran for regent in 2004, I realized that I had underestimated the importance of communication skills. I haven't gotten much better at it, but I have lived in Colorado for over half a century. I have lived in Boulder for a third of a century. I am a student right now. So I have a stake in this, and I will do my best to represent all the students. Having experience on another campus as well, I wouldn't be Boulder-centric, although I'm more familiar with it right now. My education has been varied. I've also attended community college, Arapahoe Community College in Boulder, Road Tech. I went to the same science institute that Brian Davidson went to at UNC Greeley. Even though I'm a libertarian, I admire Thomas Jefferson since he started the University of Virginia. And as a libertarian, I'm currently haggling with the events planner. I'm trying to bring another presidential candidate here to the Boulder campus, Gary Johnson.
Thank you very much. Dr. Davidson, your closing comments.
I first want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. It means a lot, I think, for probably all four of us, that students and faculty and staff and maybe some folks from the community are here and are this interested in who may be sitting on the governing board of their university. I'd be honored to serve on the Board of Regents and to serve the University of Colorado in another capacity, yet another capacity. First and foremost, I'm a husband, I'm a new dad with a little guy who just started crawling a couple weeks ago. I'm a physician, I'm a student, I'm a faculty member, I'm not a politician. This is what I believe that I can do for the university. This is where my interests are. This is where my competency is. And this is where my passion is for higher education. I have been a student for a long time. I actually finished my last program at Regents University just 1 year ago this month. I completed a graduate certificate program. So I've paid a lot of tuition, and I've sat in a lot of classrooms and done a lot of online and distance learning and those kinds of things, which I think bring a very unique perspective to the board as both a recent student and a faculty member in a position of an institution that has such a large healthcare system. I hope your choice is centered on a candidate with practical experience, first-hand knowledge, and a vision of where CU is now and where it can be. Someone who will offer to put your best interests first and to create a student-centered university. I offer a genuine, sincere interest in this job, and again, like Mr. Ludwig said, is for whatever it's worth, campaign chair for my campaign is former U.S. Senator and UNC President and CU President Hank Brown. We share similar visions for higher education, have similar backgrounds in a number of areas, and I look forward to the opportunity to serve you and to serve individuals at other 3 campuses and throughout Colorado. And I thank you all very much for coming tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Davidson. I'd like to thank all of you for coming and the candidates for your kind and cogent and responses, and for treating me as a first-time moderator very kindly. I didn't have to go all candy crowded tonight. Thank you.
All right, just really quickly, if we can get another round of applause for the candidates and for our moderators. I just want to express gratitude for everyone that came out tonight and for the candidates coming out tonight. Like we've mentioned time and time again, this election is very important. It's very important for students the most. Just really quickly, CUSG also developed a candidate questionnaire, and this actually has all the candidates that are running for the at-large position, District 3, District 7, and District 5. And many of you already have this, but if not, it's in the table outside. And the Boulder Daily Camera also has a voter guide out there if you guys want to pick it up on your way out. Once again, thank you very much.